Okay. Okay. My topic is vulnerable plaque. So, vulnerable plaque concept has been talked about and thought about very differently by many different people. It was originally defined when it was brought in as a concept. It was originally defined as a plaque that is the culprit lesion for any acute coronary event. That was the concept that was brought in. But currently, in the literature, whatever we see, whenever they mention the vulnerable plaque, it is interpreted as a plaque with specific morphologic features which denote destabilization or a plaque that is prone to rupture. So both are quite different, but this is the currently defined vulnerable plaque. Coming in brief about progression of any plaque. The
Voice
first,
is
this is the
breaking,
AHA
Gautam.
classification of AHA classification. Now, hello.
Yeah, Gautam, we
Yeah.
can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. This is the AHA classification of plaques, atherosclerotic plaques. The type 1 is the initial lesion. Type 2 is fatty streak when there is intracellular lipid accumulation and multiple foam cell layers are formed. Initial lesion is when there is only extracellular lipid with no intracellular lipid accumulation. Then type 3 is a pre-atheroma where there is again extracellular lipid accumulation inside the matrix, in the extracellular, inside the matrix, plus intracellular lipid also, that is the foam cells. And lipid in extracellular matrix might replace the matrix components, that is the collagen and other matrix components, and also drive SMCs apart from the intima. Then type 4 is, or it is basically the progression. So the fourth lesion is the atheroma, which is the lipid core. It is the necrotic lipid core formed by necrosis or apoptosis of all various kinds of cells that are found in an atherosclerotic plaque, like macrophages, foam cells, RBCs, also mixed with cholesterol crystals. Then there is the fifth lesion, that is that can be three types. Fibroatheroma, where the lipid core is associated with the fibrous cap, or it can be predominantly calcific atheroma or a calcific plaque, or it could be a fibrotic plaque which has more of fibrous component and very less lipid component. And the sixth lesion is a complicated lesion that is complicated by rupture or erosion. Now the mechanisms of this progression, of any atherosclerotic plaque, three pathogenetic processes combine to form a vulnerable plaque, that is hyperlipidemia, inflammation, and angiogenesis. When an atherosclerotic plaque is formed, when there is oxidized LDL cholesterol in the intima, which is taken up by macrophage.
Classification, no?
ACC classification of atherosclerotic plaque. Oxidized LDL cholesterol, when it is taken up by macrophage to form a foam cell, and there is also some extracellular oxidized LDL cholesterol, as I said, in a pre-atheroma. This oxidized LDL cholesterol increases oxidative stress, produces reactive oxygen species, like superoxide anion, and which increases inflammation, which again recruits more leukocytes, that is T cells or bone marrow derived monocytes into intima. It also, so inflammation is also induced by oxidized LDL cholesterol, and oxidized LDL cholesterol also increases hypoxia inducible factor 1 alpha, which increases vascular endothelial growth factor and leads to neoangiogenesis. So this is a basic premise of the progression, a mechanism of progression of any atherosclerotic plaque. There are various other mechanisms that there are various other processes happening in a plaque, but I'm just talking in brief the important pathogenetic mechanisms that we can link with each other and understand the concept of a vulnerable plaque. So the pro-inflammatory milieu is formed by activated endothelium, which increases NF-kappa B, which is atherogenic. There can be pro-inflammatory macrophages that are called M1 type of macrophages that are pro-inflammatory. They release TNF alpha, IL-1 beta, IL-6, ROS, MMPs. All these are pro-inflammatory markers or pro-inflammatory mediators. Sorry. Then you have T cells, predominantly the Th1 phenotype that is pro-inflammatory. It releases interferon gamma, which again activates the M1 type macrophages and keeps this pro-inflammatory state sustained. There are also anti-inflammatory mechanisms going on in any atherosclerotic plaque, mainly by anti-inflammatory macrophages that are called M2 macrophages. They release TGF-beta, IL-10, and something called SPMs. SPMs are specialized pro-resolving mediators. So TGF-beta, as we know, improves healing. IL-10 is an anti-inflammatory mediator in itself. SPMs mediate a process called efferocytosis. Efferocytosis is nothing but removal of all those necrotic or apoptotic cells in an atherosclerotic plaque by phagocytic cells. So they resolve these mechanisms and improve healing in any atherosclerotic plaque. When due to many conditions like increased age, diabetes, smoking, genetic factors and epigenetic modifications, the pro-inflammatory milieu predominates over anti-inflammatory mechanisms. So that leads to apoptosis, which can lead to secondary necrosis that is called necroptosis. Defective efferocytosis, as I said, removal of apoptotic cells is defective. Increased tissue factor expression. Basically all these leading to a vulnerable plaque. So neoangiogenesis, I just wanted to talk about neoangiogenesis. Neoangiogenesis also keeps happening in an atherosclerotic plaque along with these processes. Neoangiogenesis initially is defensive when it's called physiological neoangiogenesis, because the new vessels are formed against hypoxia when the hypoxia is induced by oxidized LDL cholesterol and such processes. Against hypoxia, new vessels are formed. Hence, what new vessels do is they help in the removal of lipid from atherosclerotic plaque via the adventitia. But sustained inflammation, as happens during all these causes, as I said, the sustained inflammation changes this converts this physiological neoangiogenesis to pathological, where the neoangiogenesis is formed only by a single layer of endothelial cells and are easily prone to injury. And the injury to this layer of endothelial cells leads to intraplaque hemorrhage. And also it is a pathway for leukocyte recruitment. Endothelial cells or the new vessels have more receptors to recruit leukocytes, and so it again leads to more and more inflammation by a positive feedback. Now coming to features of vulnerable plaque. What are the features of a vulnerable plaque? There are some major criteria and minor criteria that were this is usually talked about whenever a vulnerable plaque is talked about. That's why I put this. It's not very important to know why they are major or why they are minor criteria, because now there is nothing like major and minor criteria. This was in use for a long time earlier. So I've just put this because it was published in 2003, long time back. Major criteria for to say that it's a vulnerable plaque are active inflammation. So these are basically the features of vulnerable plaque. We can remember just like that. Large lipid core with thin cap fibroatheroma, endothelial denudation with fibrin formation on the surface, a fissured plaque, stenosis of more than 90%. I've underlined this because this was only written in this article. Later, whenever people talked about vulnerable plaque, they always talked about non-culprit vulnerable plaques, non-stenotic vulnerable plaques, which have which may not be obstructive. So non-obstructive vulnerable plaque was talked about later in various studies. So this stenosis of more than 90% was given by this Nagavi et al., which later was not really followed when they defined vulnerable plaque. And minor criteria were superficial calcified nodule, glistening yellow appearance of any plaque, intraplaque hemorrhage, endothelial dysfunction, positive remodeling. They missed neoangiogenesis in this, which is also a very important component of any vulnerable plaque, as per the current literature definition of a vulnerable plaque. Now, coming to detection of vulnerable plaque, there are various imaging techniques that characterize plaque composition at tissue level. Any modality that is used to detect vulnerable plaque should have appropriate validation against histological studies involving linear regression analysis, also confirmed in animal models before using in human models. A prospective natural history study of each technique, for example, an IVUS, must validate prognostic and clinical implications. So a study is also essential for any imaging modality to be eligible to detect vulnerable plaque. This is a summary given in Topol about various intracoronary techniques to characterize plaque composition. See, the features of vulnerable plaque that is best identified by these techniques is mentioned here. IVUS identifies remodeling the best. IVUS with virtual histology can mostly detect only the necrotic lipid core. I'll come to it in some time. OCT can detect various components of or various features of a vulnerable plaque. Necrotic core, yes. Fibrous cap thickness only by OCT currently among the imaging modalities. Macrophages also can be seen by OCT. That is the only modality again which can be detected by OCT. Near infrared spectroscopy along with IVUS also can identify only the necrotic core, or what we call lipid index. I'll come to it later. So in the right column, as we can see, the resolution of IVUS is around 100 to 250 microns. And if you see IVUS with virtual histology, that is with advanced tissue characterization, the resolution actually comes down. It's 480 micron, and OCT has a very high resolution of 5 to 20 microns. So these imaging modalities, I would like to say that these are the structural, the modalities used for detection of structural features or the morphological features of a vulnerable plaque. Coming to IVUS first. Under IVUS, grayscale IVUS, that is the usual grayscale IVUS without advanced tissue characterization. I'm not going into the details of instrumentation or all that. I'll just talk about the logistics and all that. I'll just talk about the IVUS features of vulnerable plaque. In a vulnerable plaque, what we can see with IVUS are largely, one is large neck core. I made a small pictorial diagram which shows intima, media, there's a lumen there, and a lipid core with a fibrous cap. Okay, so the fibrous cap is facing the lumen, lipid core is towards the intima. So this large lipid core can be identified by IVUS with some accuracy. The specificity of IVUS to detect this large necrotic lipid core is 97%. How it appears on IVUS, a large necrotic lipid core? It's a non-calcified plaque with an echolucent zone with high attenuation. Why I have written non-calcified plaque is this echolucent zone with high attenuation, as we can see in this picture. This is an echolucent zone that is denoted by this arrow. There is not much attenuation here actually in this picture, but you can see in this picture, this echolucent zone has a very high attenuation. High attenuation means the structures behind this zone are not visible well. So high attenuation with an echolucent zone can be produced on IVUS by a lipid core as well as by calcium also. So in the absence of calcium, if we find these findings, it indicates a necrotic lipid core. This lipid core is basically formed by apoptosis of lipid-laden macrophages that are the foam cells and RBCs. There is also free cholesterol and hypoxic. The environment is very hypoxic. And this is also this lipid core is also enhanced or facilitated by collagen dissolution by matrix metalloproteinases that are secreted by macrophages. This is another example to show IVUS. This fibrous, this is an example where you can see the fibrous cap more clearly, and behind that fibrous cap is the large necrotic lipid core that is echolucent. And this is basically a case where the fibrous cap has ruptured and the lipid core components are connected to the lumen of the vessel. Next, this is one thing that we can detect, that is the large necrotic lipid core. Next feature of vulnerable plaque that can be seen on IVUS is positive remodeling. IVUS, because it has low axial resolution or lateral resolution, the penetration is more. As we all know, penetration is inversely related to resolution. So positive remodeling, we need to define the outer layer, the adventitial. We have to see up to the adventitia. So IVUS defines positive remodeling the best. Positive remodeling indirectly indicates that the atheroma is large, the core is very large. That is what it indicates. And this also is an explanation for a large atheroma, for a atherosclerotic plaque being large and still it being non-obstructive, because there is positive remodeling. It is not obstructing the lumen. It promotes, this positive remodeling also mechanically promotes higher stress at fibrous cap. Increased levels of matrix metalloproteinases at intimomedial surface leads to digestion of internal elastic media and compromise of media and adventitia. That is the mechanism of positive remodeling. This is a pictorial representation of positive remodeling. IVUS criteria for positive remodeling is, here we see the diameter of external elastic area, not the diameter, external elastic membrane of the plaque divided by external elastic membrane area of the proximal reference segment. If that ratio is more than 1.05 on IVUS, it is considered that there is positive remodeling. This is an example showing that. As we can see, this, the area can be calculated on IVUS, the IVUS equipment. The proximal reference area here, for example, EM, up to the EM, if you take, the area is about 14.9 millimeter square, and inside the lesion it is about 18.9 millimeter square. So the remodeling index is 1.27. That indicates there is positive remodeling. So this is best seen on IVUS. We should remember this, especially with IVUS. Then you can also see calcified nodules. Calcified nodule. Oh, I don't know where that diagram went. I put the diagram. Okay. Calcified nodules are also a feature of a vulnerable plaque, because calcified nodule, I missed that diagram. I'll put it later. Calcified nodules, basically on IVUS, you see it as a calcified lesion or a calcification that is protruding into the lumen, where the luminal surface is convex shaped, and it is also irregular, the luminal surface, unlike the usual calcification that is seen in the deeper layers. There they are more concave towards the lumen. Here they are more convex towards the lumen and very superficial. What they do is, because they protrude from the atherosclerotic plaque, from the lipid core, from the necrotic lipid core, they protrude towards the lumen. And so they make the fibrous cap very weak. And hence these, because of the presence of these calcified nodules, the fibrous caps are prone to rupture. These also can be seen on IVUS images. Then comes thin capped fibroatheromas. These are formed, basically the fibrous cap, it is becoming thin. Okay, this is getting thinned by digestion of collagen by matrix metalloproteinases again. And studies have shown threshold of less than 65 micron thickness to be for a fibroathyroma to be called thin capped. The IVUS resolution, as we all know, is about 100 to 250 micron. So we cannot accurately detect the thickness of fibroatheromas, but we can differentiate between two fibroatheromas. One is thicker than the other, and hence have been studied like that in the very early studies to show that the thicker fibroatheromas were more resistant to rupture and thinner fibroatheromas were more prone to rupture. But the resolution is low, so we cannot quantify the thickness of fibroatheromas. Coming to virtual histology IVUS. Virtual histology IVUS is a specialized IVUS technique that is used for advanced tissue characterization. That is, we are studying components of tissue. I'll tell you what it is. Prospect trial was done in 2011, and this was done using virtual histology IVUS. There are 697 patients with acute coronary syndrome were studied. Out of the 697 patients, 3,160 lesions were studied. Patients presented with ACS, the culprit plaques were identified, but non-culprit plaques of the three vessel IVUS, virtual histology IVUS was done. In all those three vessels, whatever plaques they found, they measured the thickness of the plaque, they measured the plaque burden, and also the minimal lumen area. And then these were noted and prospectively studied up to 3.5 years of follow-up, and subsequent angiography was performed. Patients who presented with ACS subsequently underwent angiography. So among these non-culprit lesions during index event which were studied, they eventually ruptured to produce future events. So they were characterized by three major characteristics that were thought to define these vulnerable plaques in this prospect trial. And it is a very important landmark trial. Even now, the trials that are being done are compared to prospect trial in the design and the way it was done. The three characteristics were virtual histology defined TCFA. How did this virtual histology define this thin capped fibroathyroma? Thin capped fibroathyroma, first of all, was defined by presence of more than 10% necrotic core. I'll show you the picture of virtual histology IVUS, how it characterizes the components. This is the image showing virtual histology IVUS image, where the red one is the necrotic core. It is depicted by red color. So here in this, for example, in this lesion, there is 50% of necrotic core. So in any plaque, if there is more than 10% necrotic core, it is called a fibroathyroma. And for that fibroathyroma to be thin, more than 30% of lumen, more than 30 degree of the lumen was abutted by this fibroathyroma in 3 consecutive frames. Then it's called a thin capped fibroathyroma. Basically, this thin capped fibroathyroma always comes with a large necrotic core. So this large necrotic core is again indirectly saying that it's a thin capped fibroathyroma. As I said, the thickness of fibrous cap cannot be measured accurately by IVUS. So this is how they define thin capped fibroathyroma. In this study, as we can see, if the subjects had a thin capped fibroathyroma and 4.9% of plaques or the lesions that had only thin capped fibroathyroma as their characteristic feature ruptured eventually. 10.2% of thin plaques that had 2 characteristics, that is TCFA plus MLA less than 4 millimeter square, ruptured eventually. 16% of TCFA plus plaque burden of more than 70% ruptured eventually. And TCFA plus plaque burden more than 70% and MLA less than 4 millimeter square, all these characteristics, the lesions that had all these 3 characteristics, 18% of them ruptured eventually, which means almost more than 80% of them didn't rupture also. So that we have to keep in mind. Okay, that is about virtual histology IVUS that was studied in prospect trial. I have only described the prospect trial and given you an image. these three characteristics we should know on virtual histology IVUS that can define a vulnerable plaque. There was another study, that is atheroremo IVUS, where 581 patients with ACS as well as stable angina were studied. The same design, that was a prospective study where non-culprit lesion related MACE were predicted on a patient level. There it was a plaque level. Here it's on a patient level, because any patient who was thought to have a vulnerable plaque, if he developed an acute event, it was considered that that plaque led to that event, but they didn't really ascertain that that was the plaque. It is only on a patient level that was studied. Here the characteristics that led to rupture of these plaques were only two, that is MLA less than 4 millimeter square and plaque burden more than 70%, but not the virtual histology IVUS defined TCFA. This was at 5 years of follow-up. Actually, at 1 year of follow-up, they found that all these three characteristics led to the event. But eventually, at 5 years, when they studied, the RF IVUS derived TCFA did not lead to the rupture of plaques. But this trial was underpowered for studying this, is what they found out. And they also studied only a single segment non-culprit plaque. They didn't, unlike in a prospect trial where they studied all three vessels, here only a single segment was studied. And IVUS by many was thought was inaccurate for detecting thin cap fibroatheromas. So these are the disadvantages or the limitations.
In prospect trial, thin cap fibroatheroma, how they defined? Because virtual histology cannot.
I told na. No, that's what the resolution is not as high, that is as required. So this is the definition of thin cap fibroatheroma they gave. That is the 30 degree of lumen. 30 degree of lumen is 30 degree arc, I mean. Out of the 360 degrees, if 30 degree of lumen was abutted by fibroatheroma. Now what is fibroatheroma is more than 10% of necrotic core should be there inside. So if that more than 10% necrotic core is there, abutting more than 30 degree of the lumen in 3 consecutive frames on IVUS images, then it is called a thin cap fibroatherom. They indirectly said that large lipid necrotic core itself denotes that the fibroatheroma is thin capped. So they measured a large lipid necrotic core and then said that this is a thin cap fibroatheroma. They didn't measure the thickness, okay. Because it can't be measured by IVUS.
Gautam, when they say plaque burden more than 70%, that
plaque burden more than 70% is the standard definition, where the area of plaque to the area of lumen, okay, is more than 70%. Basically, they take from the center of the lumen to internal elastic lamina. Okay, that is the total area, and then they take that area minus the lumen area to denote plaque area. This is what is given in IVUS. I didn't go into the details of that.
Okay.
This is
so that is the minimal in that entire scan where there is a maximum plaque. That ratio will take, no?
Yeah, exactly. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
No, it is just the difference of lumen and the size of the vessel. You can remember like that.
Correct. So the size of the vessel, they take it up to the internal elastic lamina.
It includes everything with the vessel, normal vessel also, abnormal vessel also.
Oh, but the ratio when we take the plaque burden which we take, that will be the portion of the scan where there will be highest burden, no?
Smallest diameter, you mean?
Smallest diameter.
Whatever you are saying is correct. Whatever you are saying is right. The maximum plaque burden where we are getting, we have to take that.
That's what Lokesh is saying. Basically, at the place where you get the smallest diameter, you will basically subtract the lumen area from external elastic membrane area. That's all. So you'll get external.
Not internal. Internal is your lumen.
Internal is the lumen. External. So you'll get the
external elastic lamina. External elastic lamina.
Okay.
External elastic lamina minus the lumen area.
Okay.
Anyways, we'll have an IVUS talk also. I mean,
Yeah.
Varshit,
Right.
that will probably see. Yeah.
Then coming to NIRS, that is near infrared spectroscopy with IVUS, combined with IVUS, it also can identify only the lipid core plaque. Okay. There have been studies which have shown that lipid core burden index, that is the maximum lipid core burden index over a 4 millimeter segment of any vessel or any artery, if it is more than 400, it is shown to be a predictor of rupture and also subsequent events. Okay, even for STEMI, it was studied particularly, where it was shown that if it is more than 400, then it would predict a STEMI or intermediate follow. So this is an example of that picture of a near infrared spectroscopy image. The yellow is the lipid core and the red is the normal segment without lipid core. And they combine it with the IVUS cross sections here to show where the lipid cores are in the vessel, which part of the which circumferential part of the vessel has the lipid core. This lipid core burden index is measured by that's an index actually where there is a threshold for saying that this qualifies for there is a threshold of some I forgot that. Dimpu, you know that?
What?
There is a threshold for calling it a lipid core burden. Okay, in near infrared spectroscopy.
Above 900 basically has the worst outcomes. That much.
No, not that. This is the LCBI over 4 millimeter segment. But to call it a lipid core burden, there is one more thing. Okay, that we'll discuss later. Anyway, this LCBI more than 400 is going to predict future events. Okay, so this basically is a chemogram. This is called a chemogram that shows lipid arranged longitudinally as well as circumferentially along with IVUS images. And there are ongoing trials that are using this near infrared spectroscopy to study the ability to predict events, the RCTs. One is Prospect 2 and another one is lipid rich plaque study. These are big trials that are ongoing. Prospect Absorb is basically a sub-study of Prospect 2 where they are looking at the effect of using bioresorbable scaffolds versus no treatment for the plaques that are eligible to be called vulnerable by this technique. Then coming to OCT.
Gauti.
Yeah, tell.
Just once go to the above image.
This one,
this has two components. Like
two components. No, one is circumferential. There's
the
in
arc.
circumferential. This arc, the yellow thing that is shown is lipid, according. As per the near infrared spectroscopy. And that when it is combined with IVUS, see, you can look at the inside picture, that is the IVUS, which is also showing a very echolucent lesion with very high attenuation.
Correct.
Okay, so that also indicates. So they have correlated both these techniques, and then what they do is they put it longitudinally. The lipid, this yellow thing indicates that it's a lipid core that has exceeded the threshold needed to be detected by near infrared spectroscopy. And when they are measuring the 4 millimeter segment that has the maximum lipid core, in this longitudinal image, you can see that this is the part that has the maximum lipid core burden, as it is all yellow here. And that 4 millimeter segment they take, and then they calculate how much it is. Like this shows that it's 532. The 4 millimeter segment of lipid core burden that is showing the maximum lipid core burden is the maximum LCBI over 4 millimeter. It is specifically defined over 4 millimeter only. And in this case, it is 532 units. This 532 has crossed the threshold of 400 which is predictive of future acute events. This patient later came with a STEMI. Actually, this patient, whose picture I've shown.
This 4 millimeter is fixed for all analysis.
Yeah,
or
correct.
is this
That
for
is
this
measured
case?
over 4 millimeter segment. Any
Okay.
continuous 4 millimeter segment where you can get the maximum lipid core burden. That you have to
Okay.
take.
Okay.
And that, if it is more than 400 units, that's what I said. That 400 units from where it is coming, I have forgotten that because I thought it would be discussed later. That more than 400 units, we have to remember for it to be called a vulnerable plaque as per current literature. Okay. So this is how they actually defined in a trial called yellow trial. Okay, I'll come to it after some time. Not going in detail actually. I'll come to it later. So this is about IVUS. These are the things that can be seen on IVUS. Now coming to OCT. OCT can detect thin cap fibroatheromas because as we know OCT, the resolution is 5 to 20 micron. So fibroatheroma can be measured. And OCT can also detect inflammation happening. That is because we can identify macrophages on OCT. So abundant macrophage activity, if it is present, then that can be detected as signal rich, confluent or punctuate regions. I'll show you the figure. Then you can also quantify neovascularization. Neo vessels, that are the new vessels that are formed, have no signal on OCT. They are present in, they are tubular. On cross section, you can see as circles, small circles, without connection to lumen. And the lipid pool is defined, it can be seen, not defined, it can be seen on OCT. It's almost like how we are seeing it on IVUS. That is, it has low signal and also high attenuation. Low signal, high attenuation. And the lipid arc, if it is more than 90% covering the circumference, more than 90 degrees, more than 90 degree of the circumference, then it is found, thought to be significant and denotes a large lipid pool. So this is an example of thin cap fibroatheroma. This is the fibroatheroma, that is the one that is facing the lumen. Fibrous cap. Fibrous cap is high intense.
Gautam, can you use your pointer?
That can be measured on OCT. Yeah, wait. I'll just a second. This is the fibrous cap here, this one. So in this image that I've shown, the fibrous cap was measured to be somewhere around 50 micron. So it's a thin cap fibroatheroma. And also this thin cap, behind this, we can see there is a echolucent zone, or the low, not the echolucent, the low signal zone with very high attenuation. Okay, we are not able to see any structures behind. So that indicates a large lipid core here and a thin cap fibroatheroma. As I said, thin cap fibroatheroma and large lipid core always go together. So that's what I said. In IVUS, they detected very large core lipid atheroma and then thought that it's a thin cap fibroatheroma. So this is a thin fibrous cap and this is a large necrotic core. Here we are seeing macrophages here. Dot like structures or this is signal rich actually, signal rich punctuate region. Okay, these are called signal rich punctuate region. That indicates that there is a high macrophage burden indicative of ongoing inflammation. And then here we are able to see neovessels. These are the neovessels, indicative of neovascularization happening. In this view, this was the magnified view. This is the usual resolution. And here again we can see this is the lipid. This entire thing is a lipid core actually. So this is covering more than 90 degree. It is almost covering 200 to 250 degrees. So this indicates that the lipid pool is quite large, quite significant. So these are the OCT images that can help us detect a vulnerable plaque. There is something called micro OCT that is not in clinical use, where the resolution is only 1 to 2 micron. And here the resolution is approaching histology levels actually. They can detect subcellular processes happening. So it may prove useful in future. Then coming to CT coronary angiography. In detecting thin cap fibroatheromas, it compares favorably with OCT, CT coronary angiography. CT coronary angiography can assess the presence and size of necrotic core. Again here, the low attenuation plaque, less than 30 Hounsfield units, they have taken it as a threshold after various studies. That indicates a large necrotic core. And then here on CT also you can see these 4 features are characteristic of vulnerable plaque on CT. So first is the necrotic core, again low attenuation plaque, it is called LAP, low attenuation plaque. Then you have positive remodeling here also detected on CT. Here the remodeling index is more than 1.1, that is the threshold used in CT. Then you have a napkin ring sign. It is basically a ring, calcified ring that you can see. And then you have spotty calcifications. That spotty calcifications, why they have taken it as a feature saying that it's vulnerable is, and calcification that can be less than 3 millimeter. It should not be large. It should be, there should be small calcifications, spotty calcifications. They are called microcalcifications. How microcalcifications lead to a vulnerable plaque? There is something called peak circumferential stress of any fibrous cap. That peak circumferential stress, if it reaches more than or equal to 300 kilopascals, as they have studied in various studies, that leads to rupture of the cap. That is required. That is the threshold of peak circumferential stress that is required, and that is maximum at the shoulders of any fibrous cap, not in the center of fibrous cap. So that doesn't explain rupture of sometimes cap. Almost 50% of the times caps are ruptured at the center, and also caps more than 65 micron also have rupture. And these, if they are more than 65 micron thickness, usually the peak circumferential stress is less than 300 kilopascals. That is kilopascals actually, not micron. It is 300 kilopascals. Even then they rupture. Why that happens is this presence of microcalcifications act there. The various studies have shown what are the other factors. One of the factors is presence of microcalcifications. This presence of microcalcifications increases the peak circumferential stress at the fibrous cap, especially at the interface of fibrous cap with microcalcifications. I'll show you the example. And especially when they are closely spaced, when these microcalcifications, when they are multiple and closely spaced. This is a CT image showing this is the lumen, this is the fibrous cap, and this is the lipid core. Here you can see the calcifications, spotty calcifications. These are actually, this is a micro CT. This is called micro HRCT. Here the resolution is about some 5 to 10 microns, I guess, somewhere around that, 10 to 20 microns. Okay, so this is not in clinical use. This was used in this study. So these microcalcifications were detected at the interface with fibrous cap, and what this has led to is, here this is a 3D image, finite imaging that they do, finite elements analysis. 3D image of that finite elements analysis shows that this is the baseline stress that is there at the fibrous cap, that is 21 kilopascals. If there is a microcalcification, this stress goes up to 44 kilopascals. And if they are very closely spaced, here, that is the enlarged image of that inside. If they are so closely spaced, the stress goes up to 5 times. So this
Voice.
the presence of these microcalcifications. Hello, now is it better?
Clear, it's clear.
The presence of these microcalcifications has led to the explanation for even a fibroatheroma that is thicker than the threshold that is required for it to rupture, to still rupture. Okay, because of these microcalcifications. That is one of the explanations given to increase the stress at fibrous cap. Okay, so the presence of these microcalcifications is one of the characteristics that can be detected on a CT. But the whatever CT that we do, the CT coronary angiography does not have such fine resolution to detect such these small calcifications. But still, what we can measure is any calcification that is less than 3 millimeter is still considered a feature that may be responsible for a plaque to be vulnerable. Then you have MRI. I'm not going into detail other images. MRI, there is intravascular MRI also, which they say has the best ability to visualize tissue components actually among all the imaging components, as well as new vessel formation and wall permeability also that can be seen. But MRI is limited by lot of motion artifacts, and they have been only studied in animal studies right now, not yet applicable in humans still. And these were as I said, these were the imaging or the modalities that have been used to study the structural or morphological characteristics. Now coming to functional characteristics, there are one or two I'll just go through. One is thermography. This has been studied. The pathophysiological basis for this imaging modality has been extensively studied and validated. But the problem remains the technical issues. In this, what they do is, because the plaques are inflamed, these vulnerable plaques, as I said, have a lot of inflammation going on. They raise the temperature inside the plaque. This temperature, the temperature difference can be measured using a catheter with thermistor at tip. It is just like doing an angio with a thermistor catheter. This has proven to have very good correlation with the high sensitivity CRP, and also there has been a study that showed that post PCI, if there is a temperature difference of more than 0.5 degrees centigrade between a plaque and normal vessel wall, it has predicted MACE significantly. But the technical issues, as I said, have precluded the use of thermography. Then coming to molecular imaging is basically using an imaging modality with radio tracers. So using SPECT and PET. PET is preferable because of less motion artifact and higher spatial resolution. And you can use the tracers, use the radio tracers according to what process you want to study in a plaque. If you want to study leukocyte adhesion, you can use VCAM1 and selectins as radio tracers. If you want to study macrophage, osteopontin, collagen degradation, you can use MMPIs that are labeled, this is matrix metalloproteinase inhibitors, labeled matrix metalloproteinase inhibitors. For apoptosis, you can use annexin. For necroptosis, you can use necrostatin. For neoangiogenesis, you can use anti-vascular endothelial growth factor. These are all used for various study purposes only. These molecular imaging techniques, I don't think, are used anywhere clinically. Now, this is about the modalities to detect vulnerable plaque. Now, coming to the validity of vulnerable plaque concept. Now, what prospect trial showed us was that only 18% of so-called vulnerable plaques eventually ruptured after 3.4 years. It means it has very poor positive predictive value. Those characteristics that defined a vulnerable plaque in that trial have very poor positive predictive value. And not all plaques that ruptured had thin cap fibroatheromas in most of the RCTs that have been done so far. Significant number had thick cap fibroatheromas also. And we cannot, in this we cannot rule out the possibility of progression of those thick cap fibroatheromas to thin cap fibroatheromas, because when we prospectively study, for example, in prospect trial, in those 3.4 years, there were so many of fibroatheromas that were thick capped, and those would have progressed to thin cap fibroatheromas is one explanation that has been given for the findings that were obtained in prospect trial. And then there is a hypothesis called large plaque burden and expansion hypothesis. This was postulated by Narula et al. And also supported by many, that larger plaque volume, that is the plaques that are obstructive, is associated with more vulnerable phenotypes, is associated with predictive acute coronary events. So here again, what they say is thin cap fibroatheromas also must undergo expansion of plaque burden before rupture. So whether this vulnerable plaque hypothesis or vulnerable plaque concept is really valid, factors other than these vulnerable features, whatever I talked about just now, there are so many other factors that are affecting cap strength, that is the fibrous cap strength. What are those? Systemic inflammation also acts on the fibrous cap. It's not just the inflammation that is happening in the plaque. Systemic inflammation, the thrombogenic forces, and the mechanical stresses, especially it is negative remodeling or severe stenosis. See, severe stenosis is not taken into account when we are talking about the current definition of vulnerable plaque. That's why I said currently in literature, when we talk about vulnerable plaque, it is mostly non-obstructive plaque that we talk about, and not the severely stenotic plaque. What happens in severely stenotic plaque is they produce mechanical stress at the fibrous cap and then produce weakening of that fibrous cap. And so this is not these stresses, these additional stresses, mechanical stresses that are happening outside the plaque are not explained by this vulnerable plaque concept. Also, the plaques that are located at bifurcation points are more vulnerable to rupture. But the present vulnerable plaque concept doesn't take into account this feature also. It only takes into account the intrinsic features of the plaque. So plaque rupture is a complex interplay of that rupture leading to an acute event is a complex interplay of structural characteristics, which I discussed in detail, that is the intrinsic characteristics, and extrinsic, which can be exogenous stresses or the thrombogenic factors. So what should vulnerable plaque actually mean or actually be defined as? It should be a plaque that is prone to rupture when all intrinsic and extrinsic effects are taken into account. So concepts of vulnerable blood and vulnerable myocardium should be brought back to focus, that vulnerable blood, vulnerable myocardium, vulnerable plaque all lead to a vulnerable patient. But right now, presently, these exogenous factors, what we are talking about, these mechanical stresses, the stresses that are produced by these processes, that is negative remodeling or severe stenosis, cannot be investigated by the current technological armamentarium. So we cannot really tell about the extrinsic forces.
Gauti,
So
how does this vulnerable myocardium predict rupture of a plaque?
vulnerable, no, actually it is not the rupture of the plaque. It is about the acute coronary event, not the plaque rupturing. It is about the acute coronary event leading to that thing is a little off. They wanted to just bring it to tell that it should also be included along with vulnerable blood and vulnerable plaque to define a vulnerable patient, because this vulnerable
I think
more
maybe
electrically unstable,
as you are saying, maybe
more electrically unstable.
okay.
What I have read, I have not read it in detail actually. There are many studies for that also. What they just say is, it is more than the myocardium being prone to ischemia, myocardium being prone to arrhythmias. So that leads to probably more serious acute events, not just the rupture of a plaque. It is not definitely not that myocardium is not going to play a major role in any plaque that is going to rupture. It It is about how a patient presents to you, how that acute event turns out to be, or something like that. Okay, how serious is that acute event going to be? Okay, so that is the concept of this vulnerable myocardium.
Okay.
But I don't know, I have not read it in detail.
Gaurav?
Just
In CSA 2019, there is a chapter, vulnerable plaque versus vulnerable patient.
correct, but that vulnerable myocardium, whether they have given in detail,
Yeah, they
I
have
have
given
not
one page.
read that in detail. Okay, we can go through that, I think. But there are various studies that have been, because this was an older concept, this vulnerable blood and vulnerable myocardium, and they discarded it more in favor of this vulnerable plaque. Again, now people are questioning the validity of this vulnerable plaque and thinking to integrate all these.
These vulnerable plaques are actually not vulnerable.
Yeah, that's why I'm giving you the last part. That is why it is not very important right now today. Andre, not it may sound very important when you hear the
But
name of
statistics wise, they doesn't rupture mostly.
Yeah, correct.
It was given most of them will regress.
Correct. That's what I said. Only 18% of them ruptured. No? In that prospect trial also,
Yeah.
that was a prospective study. It was the largest prospective study. I mean, the most valid prospective study for studying the vulnerable plaque. That itself said only 18% of the plaques that had all these characteristics ruptured. So,
And in the
that is why
follow-up,
this-
in that 3.2 years, if they have taken 100 ACS events, these vulnerable plaques are responsible only for 4% of the events.
That is if it is a only thin cap fibroathyroma. If it has all three characteristics, then 18%. That is what I said. If it has only thin cap fibroathyromas, then it's only 4%.
Yeah.
Correct. What you said is correct.
You mean the remaining 82% events happened in coronary
Other
No,
plaques.
no. They
The
didn't
coronary
rupture.
artery segments were normal.
They didn't rupture. They didn't rupture to produce coronary events. There were, like, for example, if you have 100 plaques which had all three characteristics, then only 18 of them ruptured to produce acute coronary event in 3.4 years.
No, then huge number. No, it is not small number. 18%.
No, 18% is a significant number, but still, in 3.4 years of follow-up, if the 82% of those plaques didn't rupture, and they also saw that 50% of those events that happened were also due to thick cap fibroathromas. That also was seen. It's not just that those thin cap fibroathromas ruptured. It's not 50%, it's somewhere around 40%, something like that. So those,
I mean, apart from thin cap fibroathromas, other plaques also.
Other plaques also ruptured. Correct.
Okay.
So vulnerable plaque is a valid concept in principle, yes, holding great promise for future research. More research can be done, and this also has actually led to knowledge of very important pathogenetic mechanisms that lead to a progression of a plaque. Okay, but current interpretation of incomplete data for vulnerability assessment has rendered it inaccurate. Currently, localized treatment, they have used treatment like stenting of those vulnerable plaques that was defined by these criteria or these features, and that was proven futile, and so it is not advisable. Some trials that have shown findings in favorable of this hypothesis. It is not that they studied to show this hypothesis, but some findings that were found was in yellow trial, where again, as I said, this near infrared spectroscopy was used to study the effect of aggressive lipid lowering using statins, and that regressed. What we measure on near infrared spectroscopy is the lipid core burden index. That reduced lipid core burden index significantly in 7 weeks. But there were no clinical, it is not a clinical outcome trial. And also omega-3 fatty acids resulted in decrease in lipid pool measured on OCT, and also increase in cap thickness. Here EPA, that is omega-3 fatty acids plus in combination with statin versus statin alone was studied. but there have been much larger trials which have shown actually either neutral effect or no effect. I mean, no effect at all, like against the vulnerable plaque hypothesis. GLAGO was one such trial where evolocumab did not reduce necrotic core as defined by IVUS, virtual histology IVUS. It did reduce plaque atheroma volume, plaque area, but it did not reduce necrotic core that was defined by virtual histology IVUS. CANTOS is another trial where canakinumab has shown some positive results, but here it is all because of reduction in systemic inflammation, which led to reduced HSCRP levels, IL-1 beta levels, and not just the local inflammation. Asteroid is also one such trial where rosuvastatin reduced plaque area, volume, and area. But this was again studied with IVUS only, but it did not really reduce the vulnerable features that can be studied on a plaque. It did reduce plaque area volume, but it did not show that it reduced necrotic core that is found on the IVUS or any other morphological features that are used to define vulnerable plaque. This is going more in favor of a large plaque hypothesis or large plaque burden and large plaque expansion hypothesis. So this is it. So basically, this vulnerable plaque is a local event that is happening, that is being studied. It is not happening, that is being studied, is only a local event. What we have to take into consideration is much beyond that. So this is about vulnerability. I don't know. There are many things to be talked about it also. I just could not.
This is more than enough, man.
For exam, yes. For exam, it is more than. Yes, correct.
For exam, it is enough for us.
To understand it as a concept, it is much more than that actually. You can go more in detail and still understand more.
Research and vulnerability.
Because because this is the basis of what we should know about an atherosclerotic plaque. The dynamics of any atherosclerotic plaque, the local dynamics. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Thank you. We'll take them.
Okay.
Stop.
I'll take over.
We have two topics, basically anti-anginals and statin. So which one do you think? One of it we can do today, I was thinking. What do you say?
Statin.
Okay. How long will you take, Venki?
I'll do it quickly only. Like all this statin intolerance, this adverse effects was already told by Vaniteja. So.
Okay.
Okay. Coming to role of statins in ACS. Before that, we'll have brief discussion on statins. Mechanism. Can everybody hear my voice? Is it clear? Hello.
Yeah, audible. Venki.
Okay. Mechanism of action is statins competitively inhibit HMG-CoA reductase reductase enzyme, which is a rate-limiting step in cholesterol synthesis. This causes a reduction in intracellular cholesterol level, which in turn increase the LDL receptor expression on the surface of hepatocytes. So this increases uptake of LDL from blood and in turn reduce the plasma LDL level, and also other ApoB containing lipoproteins like non-HDL components. Okay, coming to the effects of statin or lipids, it is actually divided into like high intensity statin therapy, moderate intensity, and low intensity statin therapy. High intensity means the LDL lowering is by 50% of the baseline. Moderate is 30 to 49% of the baseline, and low intensity is reduction is less than 30% of the baseline. This high intensity statin therapy which we use atorvastatin 40 mg and rosuvastatin 20 mg. Coming to effect of statins on triglycerides, these reduce triglyceride levels by 10 to 20% from the baseline. More potent statins for this effect are atorvastatin and rosuvastatin at high dose, high intensity. And this effect is independent of the LDL receptor pathway due to upregulation of VLDL uptake and reduced protection of VLDL. And this effect is also dependent on the pre-treatment levels of the VLDL. Effects of statins on lipoprotein A, the effect is only marginal, and some studies showed that these levels may marginally increase, but the mechanism is not known. And pleiotropic effects of statins, which includes anti-inflammatory and antioxidants properties, this was shown in vitro experiments. Effect on statins on CV mortality. This cholesterol treatment trialist meta-analysis showed that for each 1 millimole, that is 38 milligrams per deciliter reduction in LDL cholesterol levels, reduced MACE by 22%, major coronary events by 23%, CAD death by 20%, total stroke by 17%, and total mortality by 10%. These proportional effects, that relative risk were similar in all subgroups, but when compared in lower risk, the absolute risk reduction was less. It is because the absolute incidence of these events were also less in this group. Coming to VOSCOPS, pravastatin, mortality benefit of 18% reduction in all-cause mortality was seen over 20 years. This was pravastatin prevention, primary prevention in high-risk population. This study was. It predicted 10-year ABCD risk of less than 7.5% for patients who were treated on statins. But it's not effective in specific subgroups. The statins were not effective in specific subgroups like CKD patients who were receiving hemodialysis and heart failure patients of non-ischemic etiology. And other landmark trials are 4S Scandinavian statin and heart preventive study, which was based on simvastatin treatment for CV mortality and morbidity, which showed clear benefits in patients with pre-existing atherosclerotic vascular disease. And recent meta-analysis also showed clinical benefit of statin is a class effect, and it's mainly driven by the LDL cholesterol level reduction. And there was some concern regarding cancer carcinogenic effect of statins, but meta-analysis also showed that there was no any significant effect on cancer, and even dementia and hepatic steatosis, embolisms, AFs and PCOS, there was no significant increase in those incidents. And Cochrane analysis also showed that with respect to Alzheimer's, there was no conclusive effect of Alzheimer's disease from statins. Coming to pharmacological characteristics of statins, all the statins except pravastatin and rosuvastatin are lipophilic. These two are hydrophilic. And coming to the hepatic metabolism by CYP450 enzymes, pitavastatin, pravastatin and rosuvastatin are not metabolized. This metabolism by CYP enzyme system is minimal. That's why the drug interactions with these drugs are minimal, whereas the other drugs have drug-to-drug interactions. These are these 4S and VOSCOPS and HPS we have briefly discussed, and these are the timeline of the landmark trials in statins. You can go through that.
You told for pitavastatin it is minimal. They told.
Yes. I don't know, but we are not using pitavastatin. What is it, pitavastatin? Okay. Coming to adverse effects of statins, this was discussed by Paniteja, so I'll skip. Most of the drugs are not pro-drugs except lovastatin and simvastatin. Bioavailability is low because of first-pass metabolism, and statins are generally well tolerated. Adverse effects are very less. And coming to intra-drug interactions, these enzymes which potentially interact with statins are the enzymes which are metabolized by CYP systems. So anti-infective agents, calcium antagonists, and other drugs become later on. And one more thing, gemfibrozil and statin combination should be avoided because it increases the risk of myopathy. This statin intolerance I have just clubbed together so that it will be easy for studying. Okay. Coming to statin or lipid lowering therapy in ACS, lipid profile should be obtained soon after ACS patient's admission, and lipid lowering treatment should be initiated as soon as possible in ACS patients, and reevaluation of this treatment effectiveness should be done 4 to 6 weeks after ACS to determine whether the patient has achieved the treatment goal or not, and what is and adverse to also evaluate the safety issues and adverse drug reactions. Coming to statins, use of high dose intensity statins is recommended regardless of the baseline values if there is no contraindication. The goal is to achieve 50% reduction of baseline or absolute value of less than 55 milligrams per deciliter. And in those with recurrent events, within 2 years. For example, if patient is already on maximum dose statins and if still patient had ACS event, then the goal is 40 milligrams per deciliter. That is class 2B indication. Coming to low intensity statin in ACS patients, it's recommended only if it is not tolerated, or low to moderate intensity statin. If it's not tolerated with the high, there is statin intolerance because of high intensity, or in elderly patients more than 75 years, or in presence of hepatic or renal impairment, and when there is a potential risk of drug to drug interactions. And coming to timing of statin initiation, the SECURE PCI trial showed that there was statin should be initiated as soon as possible, and there was one study comparing 2 loading doses versus single loading dose of atorvastatin before PCI in ACS patients. There was no significant difference in benefit. One statin, that first loading dose is given immediately after admission, and second dose is given the next day before taking for PCI. And based on the current evidence in ACS patients, statin initiation should be at least within 1 to 4 days of hospitalization. Patients who are already on statin, even then loading dose should be given, especially for patients who are undergoing invasive management strategy. Coming to non-statin lipid lowering drugs in ACS, Estimate improved trial showed that simvastatin with estimate in post-ACS patients provided additional benefit, that is 6.4% relative risk reduction in composite endpoint. And patients, especially this benefit was very much higher in patients with higher TIMI risk score. Coming to PCSK9 inhibitors, Fourier trial, this was not for ACS, it included all the patients with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Statin plus evolocumab resulted in 15% relative risk reduction of composite primary endpoint at 2.2 years follow-up. Results were consistent in subgroup analysis of MI patients, and this subgroup analysis showed patients who achieved lowest LDL levels also had lowest risk of future MACE. And in Odyssey trial, that is alirocumab plus statin therapy in recent ACS patients, that is it included recent ACS 1 to 12 months prior to the enrollment. Follow-up of 2.8 years, there was 15% relative reduction in primary composite endpoint, and also 15% relative risk reduction in all-cause mortality. Coming to timing of PCSK9 inhibitors of statin, post-hoc analysis of Fourier trial showed that closer to the when the PCSK9 inhibitors are initiated closer to the ACS event, the better is the outcome. Current ongoing trial is EVOPAX, that is evolocumab in acute phase of ACS. Results are awaited. The current evidence of recommendation is initiate PCSK9 inhibitor in ACS patients who do not achieve the goal of target levels by 4 to 6 weeks. I have mistakenly not written this do not of high dose statin. Patients on high dose statin and estimate who have not achieved the target goal by 4 to 6 weeks, then PCSK9 inhibitors are advised. For patients already on high dose statin and estimate presenting with ACS, add PCSK9 inhibitor early after the event during hospitalization of the ACS event itself. Coming to omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, the GC trial showed there is no significant benefit, and even the meta-analysis also showed no significant benefit. One trial is a recent trial, REDUCE-IT trial of icosapentatriol. Oral 2 grams BD was given, and it reduced the total, especially in patients with high triglyceride levels and also CV events. It reduced triglyceride levels, CV events, and CV deaths in patients with high triglyceride levels and also cardiovascular disease and high risk of ASCVD. And subgroup analysis of this study with unstable angina showed that even this benefit was even seen in this subgroup analysis also. Coming to CETP inhibitors, there are many of the previous trials on CETP inhibitors showed no benefit, but recent REVEAL study showed that it lowered MACE compared to the placebo, but even this anacetrapib is not available in the market currently. Coming to lipid lowering therapy in patients undergoing PCI, pre-treatment with high dose statin should be given in new patients or patients on statin therapy if they are undergoing PCI. This reduced the MACE by 44%, both combined periprocedural MI and MACE at 30 days. And also shown that to reduce the risk of contrast induced nephropathy. Coming to guidelines, ACC 2018 guidelines, secondary prevention in patients who are less than 75 years of age and high with ACS or any ASCVD, high intensity statin therapy is initiated. And high intensity statin therapy in patients whom this high intensity statin therapy is contraindicated or are having statin intolerance, then moderate to intensity statin therapy should be continued or initiated. And for patients with very high risk and who are not achieved the target goal, and PCSK9 inhibitors can be started if even with after addition of estimate and this moderate intensity statin, if they have not achieved the target goal, PCSK9 inhibitors can be started. The others you can go through. And coming to ESC 2019 dyslipidemia guidelines, the recommendation is in secondary prevention for very high risk group, the target is 55 milligrams per deciliter LDL target. And for patients for patients who have had a second vascular event within 2 years or who are already on high dose statin therapy, the LDL goal should be 40 milligrams per deciliter. That is class 2B indication. And coming to these targets, for very high risk, either primary prevention or secondary prevention, LDL target is 55. For high risk, it is LDL is 70. For moderate risk, it is 100, and low risk, it is 116. And even ApoB, there are recent assays which are coming up to measure the ApoB component instead of non-HDL or LDL components, which also shows better correlation with the cardiovascular events. So these ApoB targets are for 65 for very high risk, 80 for high risk, and 100 for the moderate risk. Coming to recommendations of lipid lowering therapy in ACS patients, the same thing. There is no this Estimab and PCSK9 are class 2A indications. They are not achieved this target goal on maximum tolerated statins. And the routine pre-treatment of loading on even on background of chronic therapy with a high dose statin should be considered in patients undergoing PCA for an ACS or elective PCA. This concludes the topic.
Venki, Evopax results have come actually. It was discussed. Evopax basically, see, just to sum up this thing, in statin therapy post ACS, like a major change which came up in 2013 lipid guidelines AHA was that high dose statins, which is concept of 80 mg atorvastatin, and also this HbA1c risk score came, basically more than 7.5 predicted in 40 to 75 age group. Basically it predicted events, so they were also advised high intensity statin. Both these major changes came in 2013 lipid guidelines, and the major study after which this whole thing changed was Miracle trial. So Miracle is basically one thing which compared in post ACS patients 80 mg atorvastatin versus placebo, because by then 80 mg atorvastatin was not approved. So just if somebody asks us, we need to know basically that Miracle trial alone, if you remember, that's enough for atorvastatin 80 mg. That's after that only the 80 mg dose concept has come. Now coming to this ezetimibe, I mean, so after that pravastatin and atorvastatin was prove it, and then the same group came back with improve it, comparing simvastatin and simvastatin with ezetimibe. So like you mentioned, basically simvastatin with ezetimibe. So I just wanted to concentrate on this reduce it trial. See, the current understanding is that even with LDL reduction, if you have high triglycerides, it still contributes to a significant number of cardiovascular events. They have proved it beyond doubt. So that is why this concept of reduce it trial itself came. So reduce it basically included patients who have had an atherosclerotic event or who are at high risk for it. And they included patients with LDL between 70 to 100. Oh, sorry, LDL between 40 to 100. And the triglycerides were high in that. Triglycerides were actually between 150 and 500. So that 150 and 500 the triglycerides. So for only high triglyceride group, they compared them with placebo on this omega-3 fatty acid. Basically, this is an purified form of omega-3 fatty acid, icosapentaethyl, at 4 gram a day, 2 gram twice daily. And they found that there was significant benefit with respect to all the aspects. Even all-cause mortality was significantly lower. It was almost lower. And then in subgroup analysis for patients who had a higher tertile of the triglycerides, it was significantly lower. So basically, current understanding is that triglycerides is not as silent as once thought. So
what they say is even triglycerides has ApoB.
Correct.
ApoB
So ApoB, so which is why it is not all that innocent as we thought before. And in fact, if you see the lipid profile of people who of ACS in India, basically you will see that we fit more into a higher triglyceride profile than actually higher LDL profile, which is very common in South Asians, which is why basically South Asians is a separate risk factor associated in the 2018 lipid guidelines. When you have a patient with a moderate intensity, they have given something called as risk modifiers. No, in that one of the risk modifier is actually being a South Asian itself. The reason is this, that South Asians were found to have higher triglycerides than compared to others, which is also atherogenic. So the other about this PCSK9, the main thing for ACS is Odyssey. So Odyssey has basically looked only at ACS patients, and alirocumab basically has been found to reduce it much significantly in patients who have an LDL above 100. So there is a all-cause mortality benefit with alirocumab when taken alone in patients with LDL more than 100. But in 70 to 100 group, 70 was the recruitment criteria. In 70 to 100 group, it basically reduces the primary outcome, which is a composite outcome, but it does not have an all-cause mortality benefit. So, and in Evopax also looked at basically in the along with statins in emergency, if you give evolocumab, whether it will help or not, the results are already out actually, and the long-term outcome results are only awaited. They showed that it is safe. There is no issues in giving evolocumab, and it does reduce the LDL levels significantly when given. And one more thing I wanted to tell was, basically the current ESC lipid guidelines say that fasting lipid sample is not necessary. You can take any time of the day lipid sample to assess for lipids, and like you said, it has to be taken 4 to 6 weeks. And according to the current consensus, basically if you have a lipid target which is more than 20% away from what you want to achieve, then they say that adding ezetimibe to high intensity statins is going to be futile, because the expected benefit from adding ezetimibe to statin is only like you have given here. No, see, basically it gives only 15% extra as compared to high intensity gives 50% reduction. On top of that, adding ezetimibe will give 15% only. So if you have a LDL which is more than 20% away from the target you want to achieve, they say you can directly go for adding a PCSK9 inhibitor with high intensity, because here it says without ezetimibe in the regimen, high intensity statin plus PCSK9 gives 75. So it is 25% more on compared to 50%. So that's the thought process basically in trying to give that. And as these people endorse, the lower is the better and safer is the motto.
In both ACC and ESC, ezetimibe and PCSK are class 1. Standalone treatment with PCSK9 is class 2A.
Yeah. I think Repatha is available in India under basically it's two boluses of 140 or 180. I think it's available in India. That's the only thing available as of now.
Dimpu, hello.
Hey,
Dimpu, when to add this Evopax trial? When to add this during acute period itself?
Acute in the what they see basically 4-year trial has already 4-year trial has basically already looked at there is a benefit, but then acute at the time of admission to hospital, giving evolocumab, will it make any difference is what Evopax looked at, and they found that there is no issues and it actually helps at admission.
Okay, on admission itself we can add.
Evolocumab. But there were a lot of criticism about it because basically it is not cost effective, one thing, and second thing is that as of now all the trials have shown that it is beneficial only as an add-on. So it was more like basically, can it be given in the acute setting is basically the question they wanted to give, and there was no adverse effects. So whether it will cause long-term benefits, we will know soon, because their extended results will come in 1 to 2 years.
And Dimpu, this miracle trial, they compared 80 mg with placebo, no?
Yeah. 80 mg with placebo. It's a very old trial. That is what I'm saying. That was the first trial which showed an absolute reduction in mortality with a high dose intensity statin, and that is when that 80 mg dose concept itself came.
No, but at present, like the high dose statin is defined between 40 to 80 mg, no? For atorvastatin.
That is because, atorvastatin, it is 40 to 80, but if you see 2018 guidelines, they say it is actually 80.
Okay. So for a post ACS patient, we have to give 80 mg.
80 mg ideally, but whatever, there are, like Indian Heart Journal gives you one basically a good article from AIIMS where they have compared 40 mg and 80 mg regimens of statin in our, it came last year. So they have basically looked at in Indian setting, whether giving 40 mg or 80 mg, will it be the same? But they found that 72% of the patients when given 40 mg in Indian setting achieve 50% reduction in LDL, which is the definition of high intensity. So we are not too wrong in giving 40 mg actually.
And one of the journal clubs, Ravi Matsar was also telling that for Indians, they respond well with statins compared to the Western population.
That's what, see, the one that why I mentioned about that Reduce It trial was basically that despite reduction in statins in that same trial, basically we still have, if the same amount or even higher recurrence of events while on statins. We don't have large.
This effect on triglycerides is of statins is dependent upon the baseline VLDL levels also. It's that's why these Indians and Southeast Asians will have this high VLDL and TGL fraction. That's why they respond better with the statin.
Like they say that this CTT trials, which Venki told, no, the CTT meta-analysis, which says that for every 1 millimole, which is 1 millimole means 38 milligrams of LDL reduced, 22% reduces, no? That 22% is not actually seen in Indians is what basically that trial had to tell. They say that the reason why we will see attenuated response is, one thing is because triglycerides are key. In Indian population, triglycerides are very high for, like, be it genetic or whatever we eat, in the number of patients who present. So effectively tackling triglyceride levels, see, as of now there is no safe cutoff for triglycerides still, but one thing we know is that Reduce It trial showed that reducing triglycerides to in patients whom it is between 150 and 500 has shown mortality benefit over in a patient who has otherwise a correct good control of LDL. So that means that definitely there is a role in reducing triglyceride. It is not yet come into the guidelines at all.
Dimpu, what they say is it's better to maintain below 150 in patients with ASCVD.
No, that's based on that only, Venki. The cutoff, no, basically previously they used to not target any amount of LDL, but it is the normal for a patient with the ASCVD is 150, but we never used to have a dedicated treatment to, treat to target basically for a triglyceride, I'm saying. Right. That was not a target to achieve anything basically during the treatment in statins till now.
And even this targeting triglycerides has not yet come to the guidelines, I think.
It's not come. It will. It might come after this Reduce It. Reduce It came last year only, no? So it will come, I think, next year. I don't know. Jinesh has asked, what is the basis of using non-fasting lipids? Basically, they found, Jinesh, in the trials, basically they found that non-fasting lipids did not affect LDL values much. And even when taken as together with non-HDL, they don't affect much. Basically, if you take LDL and non-HDL, which are the only two targets which are given for cutoff, less than 70 and less than 100 as respectively, they don't affect much significantly. They affect only triglyceride levels, which is not actually a major component which we're measuring as of now. So they say that non-fasting lipid levels is also okay, especially
And
at
that
follow-up.
and calculation is also now automated, no? So that is also
Yeah,
a
it is
factor.
not back calculated, but
Hmm.
yeah, there's again this a lot of thing about
And even they tell
millimolar
that this
particular
effect
level
on triglycerides also is not significant. It's only some 9% change variation in fasting
main
versus
variation with fasting. Yeah. So
post-prandial.
see now it is going into basically measurement of particulate LDL directly rather than from the Friedwald formula which we use basically. So like measuring direct LDL millimolar particles in the form of, so but then these the I mean if you use it that way, so that's why they say basically if the triglycerides are very high, even the formula will be less erroneous. And even for the LDL values less than 50, they say less than 40 especially, Friedwald formula is absolutely wrong. So you cannot base it on that for such a low values of LDL calculated from that. That is why particulate measurement of LDL directly is actually currently being tested. Okay, thanks. Anybody wants to add something? Hello.
Okay, Dimpu, then this statins for this bioprosthetic valves is there, no? That I think I had put up in the group once. I think that is also there. You have to remember. And there is one trial for statins before PCI. No, you remember which trial?
Which one?
Before PCI loading dose we give, no? Like the statin loading dose before doing PCI. Is there any
Corona.
trial? Huh?
Corona trial.
Corona, na? That is okay.
Yeah, they checked that rosuvastatin pleomorphic effects before. No, before
Corona
PCI.
was for heart failure
PCI,
patients.
before
Heart failure.
PCI.
Heart failure. For PCI.
Before PCI, giving loading dose, I don't
Yeah, he
remember
told
which
no.
type.
He told
Which
no
one?
that one. He told Venki has told that actually. Venki, you told about that trial only, where they have loaded again before the PCA, the double loading of.
Double loading, that is SS. What is that trial? Secure PCA.
Secure PCI, I think. Yeah, that's one.
Double
Anything else?
loading. Double loading versus single loading, there is no difference. But what they tell is, if patient who is already in maintenance dose statin regularly, and if you are taking for PCA, it is better to give loading dose prior to PCA. That's what. But I don't know the trial for that. Double loading is secure PCA.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.